Hello, Cast of the Archons listeners. We are here live with Brad Andrews, the lead developer. Is that correct, Brad? That's your title?
Yes, it is.
Lead developer of Keyforge. Welcome. Thank you for coming on today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I'm really excited. Yeah, it was really kind of you to be willing to come on and hang out with us and chat about the design of the game.
Hmm.
Um, I bet there are some fun stories we're going to be able to go into.
Oh,
Just
hopefully
for,
one or two.
oh, awesome. I'm excited. Just a reminder for those of you who are watching and maybe hanging out in the chat room. First of all, welcome. Thanks for coming and hanging out. In addition, this is not actually like an AMA. Like this isn't an Ask Brad anything session. That doesn't mean if you have some questions or thoughts, throw them in the chat and maybe we can get to them. But mostly we kind of have some prepared questions and we're going to be going through really the design process, more of a look back than a look forward for Keyforge. Which is, I think, going to have be really enlightening and really fun to hear some of behind the scenes stuff. At least I personally love hearing those sorts of stories from game designers and developers. So we're excited to do that with you, Brad.
Sounds great.
Um,
I'll tell
yeah.
you guys as much as I can.
Okay. Yep. And if you can't, that's fine too. So Brad, can you give us some of your background first? Like, I don't know how many people know kind of your history. How did you get into gaming? How did you take that then into the game industry? When did you start at FFG? Like, what's kind of your background?
Oh man, so I've been playing this collectible card game since I was about 7 years old. It's called Magic, um,
I've heard of it.
and yeah, you might have heard one or two people play it. So I started playing that at a very young age and did that for a very long time, but started making my own games when I was around 16. And
Wow,
just for just
16.
just for fun. I mean, they were awful, and just getting my friends to play test my terrible games and subject them to the horrors. But I learned so much each time I'd make a game. The next one would be a little bit better, and so on and so forth. But did that throughout college just for funsies, doing writing LARPs with friends and stuff like that, just for fun. But running into my senior year, I was kind of ready to be done with academia. I was uh, studying geology and paleontology. Um, so
Really?
so that's what my degree's in.
That's a big jump.
And then I noticed that there was a job opening at the Fantasy Flight Event Center at the time. It's now the Game Center. Uh, And I was like, okay, well, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. Do I want to go back for grad school or do I want to, like do something else with my life? I didn't know. But I jumped over to the game center and started working there the day after I graduated college.
You seem like one of a long line of designers and developers at FFG that started working at that game center.
It's a good place to get a start.
Yeah.
You just get to meet a lot of people, which is always nice. And when I was working there, I got to know Eric Lang pretty well. He
Mhm.
was there working on the Star Wars card game, which I was helping play test, and got to know him. And then he encouraged me to write an email to this guy that was working on Star Wars with him, by the name of Nate French. You guys might have heard of Nate.
Yep,
uh,
absolutely.
and so Nate and I went out. We got Buffalo Wild Wings and talked poker. But at the end of it, uh, we kind of saw something in me. He's like, keep on playtesting. And about 6 months after that, a job opened up, the design department, and I jumped over, and I've been there ever since. And that was probably like 7 years ago now.
Wow, that's quite a story. Yeah.
So then from there, worked on Warhammer Conquest was my first big project at FFG with Eric and Nate.
Yeah.
Uh, then took that for a while. Did a little bit of work on some scenarios for Arkham Horror LCG, uh, the Curse of the Rougarou, and Carnival of Horror. I did those with Matt Newman. Uh, let's see, obviously designing L5R with
Hmm.
Nate and Eric Dahlman. was that, and then working at Keyforge. Oh,
One of,
don't let me forget Warhammer Invasion, Call of Cthulhu. That's some of the stuff I worked on as well.
One of the things I really appreciate about this industry is how accessible people are. I've also hung out with some of those guys like Eric and Nate, and everybody is just friendly, and they'll just hang out and get a drink with you. And I think it's just what's really unique and special about our industry. So that's awesome.
No, they're great people.
So yeah, kind of getting into Keyforge, one of the first things I got to ask, why Logos? Why is Logos your favorite house?
Oh man, it comes from my love of two very particular things. One, drawing cards. I love drawing cards in games. It feels so good to pick up the top card of your deck and just be like, I have another option. I have another thing I can do. It's like opening a present on Christmas every single time.
A man after my own heart.
So drawing cards is like the best. Another thing that Logos does really good is have crazy ways to deal damage. I love dealing damage in games, that granular element to it, and that small mathematics puzzle that you get to solve all the time, I find really fun. So damage and drawing cards really, really floats my boat. And, Logos has lots of little shock effects that they can do to add up to that. And they draw cards. And then, Quixo does two things. He deals damage and he draws cards. So
Definitely.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I understand. I like drawing cards too. I think it's just the Magic player in us. Although Chris might say it's the Game of Thrones player in him, but
it's great. I mean, when you again, surprise every time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But drawing cards is probably the most fun thing you can do in a card game. Sometimes, except for winning, but sometimes I think I like drawing cards more than that.
Oh yeah.
So Brad, when did you first hear about Keyforge? When did the idea sort of float to you?
So when I initially heard about it, I know that there was some talks about Richard having came and visited, and there was some sort of game that he had pitched to us, and there was, again, something going on with it. I wasn't paying that much attention. I was pretty deep on L5R at the time. And then I ended up getting to sit down and play a game with Michael Hurley, one of our VPs. He works with Coordinating Studios. And we played a couple games, and he kicked my butt every time. And I was like, wow, I got my butt kicked, but I still had a ton of fun. It was just a blast to play. And so I kind of got a little obsessed with it after that. And yeah, that's really my earliest memories of Keyforge.
Yeah, it is a ton of fun.
Now you mentioned Michael there. What are some of the other people that have had roles in Keyforge that are at FFG, and how did they all come together? Specifically thinking of Richard's involvement directly, and then maybe some people that we know a little better at FFG.
Well, let's talk about FFG first. So the principal development team at FFG was myself and Nate, with Danny Schaefer helping out a little bit. He did a lot of work on the intro decks, and getting those into fighting shape. So that's in terms of the development team. Then for story, of course, you've met Dan Clark, or talked about Dan Clark, I'm sure.
Yep.
He was on the panel with me at PAX Unplugged. He did a lot of work with the initial files we received from Richard, fleshing out the world of the Crucible. And
wow,
really,
so he was there at the very beginning then.
Yeah. He was one of the first people we tapped to help with it. And we kind of worked back and forth. He'd bring ideas and to us and talk about what he envisioned, and he would talk with Andrew, and so they'd kind of further the story, and then they'd get bits of feedback from us, how we'd talk about the game and the player experience and how we wanted that reflected back. And then they'd go and they'd continue to brainstorm and build the world. And they were really wonderful about incorporating our feedback throughout the process. It was really a team effort, but Dan and Andrew did such a wonderful job with the setting.
That's just really cool that the theme was part of the game from the very beginning. It's really cool.
Yeah. And then over in graphic design, Monica Helland and Chris Hosh. Monica did all the icons for the factions, or excuse me, the houses. And Chris Hosh did all the principal graphic design. He's just a trooper, and he's just done a wonderful job with the game. And then again, I can keep naming names. We have Andy Christensen and I'm sorry, all the other Taylor Ingverson doing the initial art direction, working with the story team. Again, like Keyforge is such a huge group of people working tirelessly to bring the game forward. I mean, just to make it even possible, we require one of the biggest teams we've ever put together.
Wow, that's impressive.
Very cool. Josh in the chat wants to know how much did Richard Garfield, like how much was he involved in the original design of the game? Like, did he come with like 50% of the cards and ideas, and then it was kind of worked with him from there, or like what was the percentages or the general idea behind, you know, how much he took, how much he brought, and how much you guys took over from there?
Richard brought the game to us and the entire card pool for the initial set.
The whole card.
Whoa! Wow!
And
Very
now,
cool.
and so we did a lot of development work with it, getting in its best shape, adjusting and changing rules, working hand in hand with him to do so. And really, it was a wonderful, wonderful process. He was just a joy to work with.
That's
I had
interesting.
no idea.
That's insane.
Very
Wow.
cool. And so what, like for yourself, what parts of designing Keyforge felt like, you talked about a lot of your other projects, the other games that you've worked on. What parts of working on Keyforge were similar to previous projects that you've worked on? And are there parts that have been or felt completely different and completely new and unique, to use that term, from other games that you've designed and worked on?
Well, for the biggest difference I'd say is in playtesting. Just the process that's involved in that, with testing randomized decks and trying to make sure you're getting feedback on all your cards in proper context, trying to make sure there's enough of decks available. Like, there was all these different logistical questions when we were playtesting that just normally wouldn't come up, because you'd just be like, okay, well, here are the cards, put them together in the most devilish combinations you can find and try and break the game. Instead, it's more of like, okay, well, man, it's a lot more about testing different contexts.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest difference in that experience.
So I guess one of my other questions, so the Keyforge that we play now, how different is it from what Richard brought to you guys originally? Like, are there major differences? Is it pretty close to what he had started?
I can't say too much. It's different. Again, we made changes as we went and improvements, and again, the game as it stands today is very much a product of a good, rich development period. But again, I can't say too much.
Gotcha. Understand.
I've got a kind of interesting question here. Like, I guess depending on how big the play groups or the testing was previous to the game's launch, I mean, I guess there have been a handful of like incredibly powerful combos that have come out that have kind of taken the game by storm. And of course, the percentage of these decks are minuscule, but they still have become really popular in topics of conversation and the online community and that sort of thing. Have any of these been surprises to you guys and to Richard and to FFG, or was most of that already known to you?
Well, I mean, there's always surprises when you put a group of cards out, and what people like and what they are attracted to and what combos they perceive as being most powerful. It's always a surprise. There's particular things that I saw and still believe are very powerful that people haven't talked about much yet, which is fine. The game's only been out there a couple months.
And you're not going to tell us, are you?
No, of course not.
That would take away all the fun.
Yeah.
Keyforge is about discovery, and obviously you want things for people to discover. I mean, who knows that someone might open a deck tomorrow and find, oh my gosh, these two cards work so well together, and no one else is talking about this. And you want to leave that out there.
That's got to be somewhat entertaining for you to watch.
No, it's great. That's one of the most fun parts of the game is, again, opening up a new deck, starting to play, and then realizing something about that deck, having that moment of learning. Like, oh my gosh, this deck, I can control Amber really well.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, that's really interesting. What was the play testing like? How big was the team? How do you even play test a game where it's like randomly generated, or like I don't even understand. It's hard for me to wrap my brain about how that even would work.
Well, again, we have a good team. I can't get into specifics about sizes, but it's a lot of being able to generate content for them. Yeah, and that comes down to how our deck generator works. And it's integrated into our systems in a way that it's very, very simple for me to generate test decks.
Gotcha.
So you generate entire decks. You don't hand them the card pool and say, is there anything we should keep separate from each other or keep together or things like that?
Well, you do lots of different, things throughout the different parts of the test. The key, though, you want is people playing the game. You want them simulating that actual play experience. And so getting them playing decks is very important. Now, there's times during the testing we want our play testers to be able to look at the entirety of the file, but focusing on that play experience is one of the most important things about the test in my opinion.
Yeah, because clearly at one point, you decided that there would only ever be one library access in a deck, and you decided that there would only ever be one, X card in a deck. I mean, I can't even think of. I know there's a few others, but library access for sure being one of those cards that you'll only ever find one of in a deck, or at least so far. So was that a result of playtesting, or is that just a no-brainer?
A lot of that is result of playtesting. Some stuff we know off the bat, and we design intentionally into the card pool. But you learn something about a card every time, and that's part of the process. And in the same way that you pick up a deck and learn something about it, we've picked up a deck sometimes, and we learned something about it that was like, that's not the most fun thing for the game.
Mm-hmm. And are there any? And I mean, you wouldn't have to say which, but are there any? Let's say two cards that have just been banned from each other from being in the same deck?
Yes,
there have. Okay, cool. And I guess
interesting.
Do we know of any, Patrick, Chris? I don't.
Well, one of the things about the game is it's like, just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, which is kind of the fun of the game, honestly. So I never I could think of, I don't know. I can't think of anything specifically, but
the never say never aspect of the game is so interesting because people it opens the door for so much fun speculation. People are like, is there going to be a Maverick Horseman? Well, we don't know. Just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean it's never going to happen.
Yeah. I think one of the beauties of the game is the fact that there is one of the beauties of all card games is all the talk you get to do about the game outside of playing the game. And Keyforge just very masterfully lends itself to that because there's always something kind of new to talk about. And so, yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the things we really strove for when we were making all the different aspects of the game, is to keep that aspect of discovery alive. People want to be able to find new things. And so you make things for them to find.
Yeah, Brad, you guys definitely nailed that.
Brad, when did you start playing Magic, actually?
When I was around 7.
But where in Magic's life cycle was that? Ice Age. Okay, so Magic at that time was still in that kind of sense of we're still learning what this is.
Yeah, and that's one thing we didn't know for certain, whether the game was going to take off or not. I mean, there's obviously a certain amount of risk in making a game into a new almost genre of card game. You know, we knew we really liked it. We knew we thought it was super fun. We thought it was really cool and different and amazing in many ways. But were people going to think the same thing? We hoped.
Yeah.
So far, I would say yes.
It seems like it's turned out pretty well.
Yeah. So far, you guys have done a great job.
What like, so in terms of like rarity of cards, and I think this is true for any game, a lot of the rare cards sometimes aren't the most powerful cards. They're just rare for sometimes reasons we probably don't even understand as gamers, and maybe the developers have a better idea. Are there any specific things that informed your decisions about the rarity of cards, like why a specific card might be rare, why a specific card might be special? So the master of 1, 2, and 3 is kind of the most fascinating ones, because they have a rarity on their own, right? The 1, 2s, and 3s are kind of a subsection of rarity. And then one would argue that as rare as those cards are, arguably the rarest cards in the game, definitely not the most powerful. I mean, they're good, but they're not game breaking in any way. You don't pick up one of those decks and think, I've got a competitive deck automatically. Can you talk about that a little bit?
About just rarity in general?
Well,
yeah,
I'm just curious, how does rarity work differently in a game like this than if like you're designing a normal CCG? It just seems like rarity would mean something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the biggest things about rarity in Keyforge is it very often represents complexity in a card and how it interacts with the game.
Hmm.
So a lot of the more complex cards that require more rules interactions, or just even longer text boxes, because you want to keep a Keyforge deck on a certain level of complexity.
Interesting. That makes sense.
And so having fewer rares in there generally will mean that you won't have interactions that are going too insane. Now, obviously, you want the potential for that, and people see a wide variety in the number of rares that can be in a deck. What's the most that people have found yet?
I want to say that the range that's given is between 2 and 10.
Yeah, so like there's a huge variety in there. So there's still like a very wide range of complexity that can be potentially in a deck.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That I guess there were the starter decks in the starter set, but beyond that, there is no like, this is a newbie deck and this is a advanced level deck. It's like whatever you open, you're in it. That's your deck.
Yeah.
Good luck, have fun.
But now there of course, are rares that are very powerful, and there are commons that are very powerful.
Yep.
And you want powerful, impactful cards at every rarity level.
Which is that's a little bit different than a lot of traditional CCGs, where rarity somewhat, I just feel like rarity somewhat more closely corresponds to power level in CCGs. Not completely, but more so in classic CCGs than it does in Keyforge.
And in a lot of those, it's typically because of some other aspect of the game that like a limited format, a draft play, a sealed play element that keeps that power curve so that you have that same sort of normalization of your player experience.
Yep.
And so where do Mavericks fit into all of this? Like, where did the idea for that come from? And maybe talk about that idea, where it came from, and I'm just curious about, like, have you put any restrictions? Like, I'm just picturing like a Witch of the Eye and a library access being in the same deck, in the same house, and how devastating that could be. Are there any restrictions that you guys have put on Mavericks? And again, where did that idea come from?
So the idea for Mavericks comes from the idea that we want there to always be something for people to discover. There's never going to be a shortage of absolutely unique cards that can be in your deck. cards that you're never probably going to run into someone else that has let's say a Logos Bumpsy. Like
Gotcha.
that you always want that element of discovery, and Mavericks provide that.
They definitely do. People get really excited.
And they're really cool. They look cool. They feel special. They should, because they are.
Yeah, more than anything, that's what they are. They just cool. They're just like awesome to have.
They're almost like the foil for Keyforge.
In a way, but they're very much in the space of like, well, if you have that Logos Bumpsy, you may be one of the only people in the entire world that has a Logos Bumpsy. That's cool. That's awesome. And then you get to leverage that deck in whatever play. You get to use that surprise, and you get to leverage that surprise and bring an element of discovery to your opponent whenever you play them.
Cool.
So you're always something to discover, not just when you're opening Keyforge decks, but when you're playing Keyforge. There's always surprises.
I would definitely agree. Something that I found really interesting when I first learned about Keyforge was the whole idea that the game does not use any cards for a specific resource. That's actually what really hooked me into the game. Where did that idea come from? Was that something original from Richard, or was that something that you guys developed along the way?
Oh, that's a Richard. That's a Richard, 100%.
Very nice.
Oh.
It's really unique, cool. And I think what grabs, as Audrey just said, I think it really grabs people.
No, it was one of the first things that I noticed when I sat down and played that fateful game with Michael Hurley, that like it just felt so fluid to play.
Yep. Yeah. So around the time that Keyforge came out, FFG also released another procedurally generated game called Discover.
Mm-hmm.
Did that just happen that you had two different procedurally generated games going on simultaneously? Did the technology finally catch up to do something like that? And did you guys share any like information back and forth between those two teams? Was there ways in which one influenced the other? I think it's really interesting. It just happened that way. That's really interesting, because it's almost launched a new line, or almost a new brand for FFG, which I think is really interesting, is this idea of these procedurally generated games.
Yeah. It just happened to happen that way. There was definitely some talking between the teams, but Corey being the executive of game design was obviously involved in any conversations about Keyforge. So
right. Yeah, I just think it's really cool.
Definitely. Did you have any cards that you were absolutely fond of during the playtesting phases, ones that you just couldn't get over, other than Logos?
Or the one with your art on it.
That too.
I mean, I've always liked Wixo. Let's see. What else? It's for me, it's more interesting seeing the cards that made it through without any changes, because as development goes, most cards end up getting changed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And there's very few cards that just make it through all the way with no changes. But like, take a card, Dust Imp is a perfect example of a card that just Dust Imp was Dust Imp and never needed to change.
That's fantastic.
Love that card.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great card.
And hate it at the same time.
I hate that card. Arise and Dust Imp are not my friends.
I don't know. I might have a deck with 3 Dust Imps and an Arise in it. I don't know.
So there's a kind of a running joke on this cast that there's a friend of mine. The only deck he's ever bought has 3 Dust Imps and 2 Arises, and it continually crushes me. It's very, very frustrating, because I've bought many decks, and it's like my nemesis.
That's fantastic.
So many fun combos.
Brad, I'm gonna lay a little softball on you here. Are there any fun stories from development that you want to share with us at this moment?
I mean, so there was one that probably sticks out. and it's the first time that Richard came and visited us, and I got to meet him, and we, we're sitting down to talk about Keyforge, and obviously I'd been a fan for a long time, but I wanted to have a very professional relationship with him, which worked wonders.
How nervous were you?
I was pretty nervous the first time, but again, like he's just an easygoing guy and very approachable. Like, again, I can't talk about how wonderful Richard was to work with. Like, I just can't talk enough about it. Excuse me.
Very cool.
But like we sit down and we're talking about a couple things. We had a couple ideas we wanted to float past him, and he immediately was like, okay, well, let's try it. And so we sit down, and then all of a sudden, like 5 minutes into the meeting, I'm playing a game of Keyforge against Richard Garfield.
How cool is that?
That's awesome.
And I definitely had a mental moment where I had to like step back and be like, wow, 7-year-old you would be really proud right now. and then get back to the game. And it was just like a moment of like, wow,
I'm doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just really great experience.
That's
awesome.
A very cool story.
Anything else from the team of any like fun back and forths, design, development, ways art came about, or
it's such a long journey. Is part of it. Is we were working on this game for years, that there's just so many moments, and they all kind of blend together,
Yeah, that makes sense. The fact that you were working on the game for years, but I just don't feel like I heard any leaks or anything about it until it hit at Gen Con is very impressive.
Yeah, no, it was we were super pleased about it. We got to make a really, really cool presentation at Gen Con, and it was wonderful that everyone got to walk away with some decks, because I know some people were kind of skeptical at first.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, you guys, FFG in general, you guys knocked that launch out of the park. You guys stole that show, which is really what you want to do. So nice. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So go ahead. Sorry.
No. Any more questions?
Well, I was just kind of going to ask, did you guys decide as you were moving forward, it's like, okay, since we have this unique like deck game, should we give it unique deck game? Should we give it a unique deck names, unique card art? Like, was that something original, or was that through development phases as you guys are moving forward?
The idea of having the unique card backs.
Yeah.
And
and the Archon names and all that. Is that all from Richard as well? Or?
That's Richard again. Like, again, wow. The guy's a genius. Like I still have some of the original prototypes that he printed up and to play with us. And they have unique backs, unique names on them. He had the idea for a name generator already. We ended up completely remaking it from the bones of what he presented us into what it is now. But like all of those elements are there.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Now, were you guys, when he presented that, do you know if FFG was like, yeah, we can totally do this, or you're like, we're gonna have to figure if this works or not? Did the FFG team feel prepared for something like that?
I can't talk about that. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. That's fine. I was just curious because it's just such a unique idea. I could imagine some publishers being like, yeah, that's just, we can't do that. So the fact that you guys rose to that challenge, I think is really, really cool.
Yeah.
I think we all appreciate it too.
Yeah. Where did the name Generator Celine come from? I assume it's an acronym.
Yes, it is an acronym. Rich, I have it in an email.
I'm putting you on the spot.
I know. I don't remember what it stands for. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
It's all right. We were just curious. I mean, it's a great little acronym name. It's practically your guys' version of the Gleemax or whatever.
And how does in terms of the Archon name design, like how does that work across languages? Because I've noticed that there's obviously decks across the entire world, and I've seen some, decks from different countries, and they're clearly different languages as well. Like, you know, there was a little bit of a speed bump with some of the Archon names. Just how does that work across different languages? It seems like such a huge thing to manage.
Yeah, so there are separate name generators for each and every language that we do.
Wow. That's...
And how many total languages is the game printed in, if you're allowed to say?
Oh, man. I don't know at the moment. We've been figuring out a lot of things.
It's probably not your job to know, but it is really fun. One of the cool things I've really enjoyed about this game is how international it is. In Facebook and also Twitter and Discord, all the places. There's just it's not an American community; it's a world community, and I just think for the launch of a game, the fact that you were able to launch right away with this kind of technology, but in multiple languages, is one of the reasons that exists, and so I think that's just really, really cool.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. No, we've been really humbled by the response. It's been great, and seeing the international communities pop up has been absolutely wonderful.
So you said that basically Richard came to you with the cards, and then you also said that almost immediately you and Dan were sitting down, kind of figuring out theme and how mechanics worked with the theme. Did that? So, which inspired which more? Do you think? Is it mostly that Richard came to you with these are the mechanics, and then you guys kind of built the theme on top of that, or did the theme start to also kind of develop mechanics? How much did one influence the other?
Well, there were some themes to the cards that Richard brought us, and the houses that were represented there. And so it was a lot of us taking those base themes and base ideas and then fleshing them out into a full-on, like, okay, this is what is real on the Crucible.
Right. Taking
those themes and really like making backstories for the houses, giving them names, giving them more depth.
Yeah, well, one of the cool things I've really noticed, like you just talked about yourself, how Logos is your favorite faction, and it's just really interesting how different players seem to latch onto and identify with the different themes or the different factions and their themes. Is it kind of what you imagined it would be once it got out into the wild? Like, did you? I'm just really curious at how the thematic quality of the game maybe is and isn't what you expected once it hit the community.
That's one of those things is you never quite know theme-wise what people are going to respond to, because you resonate so strongly with certain elements of the theme. Obviously, like Logos is something I get, the mad scientists, I have a scientific background, and the wackiness of it just appeals to me, and it hits me in the theme spot, if you will, right smack dab in my theme spot. But then I see other players that are responding really well to the Sanctum, which don't hit me directly in the theme spot, but I think they're super cool. But for some people, that hits them right in the theme spot, and everybody has their own theme spot, and that's awesome, because you really get to be surprised by the way people interpret the creative efforts that you make.
Right. Absolutely.
And it really emboldens us to go back and be like, okay, how do we make absolutely every aspect of our IP as cool and as interesting and as thought out as we possibly can?
Yeah.
Because every detail matters, because to someone, that detail is the most important detail that we're laying down.
Absolutely. It's fun to watch. I just love teaching the game and seeing who latches on to what house. I just think that's really, really fun. We were showing it off at PAX before the game released, and so we had a demo team that was going around showing off the game, and it was just funny watching, because all these demoers knew that was the only copy of that deck that existed in the world. And at that time, there weren't many out in the wild, And I was just watching these demo people get really attached to specific decks, and that's actually for me the moment I knew this game was going to be hot. I think I run a store, so I think my pre-order numbers went up dramatically right then and there. Like, I was like, okay, I see what's going on here, because people just got so attached to their specific deck. And I think the theme of the houses is where a lot of that comes from, even more so than any specific mechanic of a deck.
Yeah, and I've seen that so much. I was just playing in an Archon tournament on Friday at the game center, and just seeing people's attachment and like them being so proud to like talk about their decks and show me their deck lists. It was great. They're just they're so attached, and it's almost like your Archon is your best friend and or an aspect of you, and that's what we were hoping for, and it's great to see, and we want to make sure that we can continue to hit on all of those personalization and the inclusiveness and everything that makes the Archon concept cool.
Right.
So keep looking for us to keep blowing your guys' minds on that end.
In that vein, Brad, going forward with the theme the way it is, do you think we're gonna stick with these 7 houses more, or are there a lot of more houses on the horizon? And how can you maybe manage that?
I can't talk about it too much, but
Sure,
from our initial announcement at Gen Con, we've always talked about how there are just an innumerable number of houses on the Crucible.
Okay. Yeah.
Innumerable. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. That's exciting. That's very exciting.
And
Thanks for even telling us that much.
Goes with the theme of the game, right?
Yep. And
Infinite.
And that just means there's always going to be more to explore and discover.
Exactly. And that's the key. So that's something I'm trying to take to heart as we move forward with design and development, that is the heart and soul of Keyforge, and we always want to make sure that players have something they can discover.
At this point, is more of the game now in your hands and less of it in Richard's hands, or is it like, is he still very involved going forward? Or do you not talk about this? Fine. He's still involved. Yep.
And we talk frequently.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about the recent rules update that we got earlier this week, and specifically probably the most popular ruling that you guys made, which was biometrics backup. Does it now work the way that was always intended to? Was the May conflicting with the decision making of only the active player just an oversight, or like, can you talk about that real quick?
Yeah, so it was an oversight. But we felt that preserving it as written and rolling the rules as they were was more valuable at the time. But as we continue to think about it and have conversations with Richard and everyone involved in the team, we felt that it was best to get it back to its original intention, based on a lot of different factors. And we didn't make the decision lightly. We talked about it for a long time, but ultimately this is where we felt was best interest of the game and the community.
Brad, I just want to let you know, somebody in chat just said, I just wanted to say thank you for helping to create a game that I can play with my brother. He doesn't play CCGs, but he will play this and really likes it since he doesn't have to build a deck. And I've just found that story is one I hear a lot, is people who don't enjoy deck building who are finally getting to jump into these kinds of games because of Keyforge.
Well, tell him thank you very much. I guess I am telling him thank you very much. That's awesome. I love hearing those stories. Just about introducing, a new game to someone else and having them be really excited about it. I think that's one of the greatest moments you really can have in gaming, is showing someone their new favorite game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would agree. Have you noticed with like new players, is there any rules that you're introducing to them that you find really hard for brand new people to the game to really grasp or understand, like ones that maybe you have to explain just a little bit further?
For me, the one thing that I can find that trips people up a little bit is that every creature can fight and every creature can reap. And so it's one of those things that I make sure to emphasize several times when I'm teaching. And obviously, you can notice in the rules, we've tried to make sure we emphasize that very strongly.
There's so many unique things about this game. We could you could pick one thing and we could probably talk about it the whole night. But one other unique thing about the game that we are only beginning to understand is chains. Where did the idea of chains come from? Where is that something you always had kind of bouncing around, or it's just such a different idea? And I think that's partially why it's taking a little while for the community to grasp it. Where did that come from?
Chains have been better out a long time. We wanted something to be able to handicap decks, to make sure that every single purchase could be valuable. If you bought 2 decks and they happened and they just so happened to not fall close to each other on the power curve, we wanted there to 100% be a way that you could have these 2 decks play a fun game against each other. And we wanted to put that tool into the player's hands.
The only problem is my pride gets in the way. And so when I have, as I said, one deck that keeps beating me, and the opponent keeps offering to chain up his deck, and I'm like, no, this time I'm going to take you down. But yeah, I think it's from a store level. I think it's going to be great,
and that's exactly fine. Like, we wanted that option to be there, so that we're giving you the tool,
right.
But then there's also the potential in organized play for it to be something that helps create turnover in stores. When you have a time in a card game where the meta dictates that one deck is the best,
right?
You can get really stale at a store level of we don't want to show up anymore because X deck has won the last N number of tournaments, and I'll wait till the meta changes.
Seems like that's a considerable amount of foresight right there, though, because that almost sounds like something I can imagine in other companies having to react to. Like, oh man, one archetype has just taken over our game, and the fact that you built that from the ground up is just really cool, I think.
And again, it wants to focus on that local level, that store experience of, every time I go to a Keyforge tournament, there's something new to discover.
Right.
I think something that's kind of come out of that store level, for me at least, has been the kind of variety of ways that people are enjoying the game. I know you just mentioned you went to an Archon tournament, where at my store, Archon tournaments don't fire, but we have a sealed, possibly 2 sealed every week. And then we have people like our friend in chat who mentioned that his brother will only play with Keyforge with him and not other games. I think the kind of broad population of gamers that Keyforge appeals to is one of the great successes of the game. Is there a specific point or two that you think has caused that?
I mean, the focus on making sure the complexity level is managed is definitely important. Because if you get a randomized deck that's hard to play as one of your early experiences, oh man, you're going to be really turned off by the game. You want to make sure that decks are easy to use, and that was part of our whole idea with the game, is that you could pick up and play. You can make your $10 purchase and jump right in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how you have almost every kind of gamer I can think of is playing Keyforge, and that's just so I was listening to a Warhammer podcast, and they were talking about Keyforge, and that's just they don't ever talk about any other game. So I just think that's really cool how every kind of gamer seems to have jumped into this game in different facets.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful, and I think one of the things I'm most proud about is the fact that people are so easily able to jump into it. They're so easily able to engage people, and I'm seeing just so many different types of people pick up and play Keyforge, and it just so amazing to me that it's finding appeal in so many different circles.
Yep. All right. Well, we're almost to a close. Here's some big questions for you. I mostly wanted to talk about the past, but I'm going to throw some at you that maybe you can just plead the fifth one.
Mhm.
But there are expansions to Keyforge coming, right? This isn't the end.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm asking. I want to make sure. I'm not done.
Oh, I'd say stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled on the website.
That's scary. I just want to know. There will be more Keyforge for me.
I wish I could tell you, but you're just gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to wait.
Yeah. Are there any things we could look forward to with Keyforge that you can tell us about? And even if it's like a publicly known thing, something that's already just recently been announced or whatever, that you're like, this is the thing I've been waiting for everybody to know about. Is there anything on that scope that you'd like to highlight for us?
Well, we've just made announcements about all of our organized play plans.
Yep.
And I'm really looking forward to the beginning of Chainbound tournaments. I think they're going to be a really, really approachable format for gamers of all types to go out to their stores and play Keyforge. And I think them getting off the ground, I've been so excited. And I really, truly think these are going to be a game changer type of experience.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited as a store owner. I'm really excited to see what that does for our community. We've had a really good community already, but I think that the Chainbound events will continue. Well, what it will do is it will allow a lot of our experienced players are now moving into that like level of being experienced players, but new players will still be able to just walk in the door and play alongside them. So I'm pretty excited about how that could work. I mean, we'll see. One of the fun things probably for you, but also for me from a Keyforge standpoint, is there's a lot of, well, we'll see how this works out. Like you can guess how it will come out, but you don't necessarily know until it hits real life. So
yeah, and our goal with that is to continually be looking for ways to improve, always.
Definitely. So kind of off topic just a little bit, but since you've been watching this game since the get-go, you've seen all the names in it, well, as many names as you possibly can. Do you have a favorite Archon name that you've seen so far? Like one that's just blows your mind and you just love it?
Okay, so at one point I saw a deck name that was Sea Turtle, the Explorer of the Aquarium.
That's so good.
Now,
Did you get that deck?
I do not have that deck. I'm certain if it's out there, but if it is, oh man, that is probably the favorite name I ever saw.
That's fantastic.
Or there was another one. Oh, this one I know didn't make it, but in an early test run, we got one that was like the song that steals from the stars.
Wow.
Cool.
That's like an epic song or something. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I know, but the alliteration on it was just beautiful.
It's very cool.
I do like a good alliteration.
Is the, maybe you can't say, but is the like Celine, is it learning as it goes along? Will deck names grow, get better in some way? Or is it just kind of, I just know some of that, like some of the procedural generation stuff actually learns from what it's done in the past.
Celine says I'm not supposed to answer.
Okay, that's fine. I was just curious.
What?
Cool. Well, know, Brad.
No. I'm talking to him now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she says I'm not supposed to answer.
Oh man, I don't want to upset Celine because I don't want to open some really badly named decks. So I'll just let that lie. That's awesome. I'm gonna open a deck that's like Patrick, I'm coming for you. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm laying off the keyboards for a little while. Sweet. Cool, Brad.
Brad, can you talk about maybe your favorite deck? Like, do you have a deck that you play? Maybe just the houses and combos really quickly. I know our listeners love to hear about like a little bit of the, not necessarily strategy, but just the specifics of decks. Do you have one that's kind of calling your name right now?
Well, this one I've been playing, it's called the Unscrupulous Signet Spinner, which means that everyone can now look it up. And it's pretty cool. It's got Logos Brapnar and Shadows, which is one of my favorite house combinations. It's got a good smattering of just good combos and good redundancies. It's got 3 Bumpsies. And 2 Mothers and 3 Dr. Escoteras.
You seem to be a big fan of Bumpsy.
I do like Bumpsy. But like it's and so 3 Bumpsies and a War Drummer, and so that you can see.
I have to admit, I'm vaguely shocked that your favorite deck has Logos but doesn't include any Quixos.
You're looking it up. I know. I do have a deck with 4 Quixos.
Wow.
But I've been really enjoying how this deck plays. It's just got a lot of good avenues. I didn't do too well with it the other night, but that's partially on me.
So were you playing in that event at the event center?
Yeah. I went 2-2. It was not great, but my opponents definitely deserved the win.
Whoa! The person who round 1 sat down and looked across the table.
It was looking Quixo in the eyes.
The round 1 loss was my most just definitive loss. Like, we sat down, we played the game. It was probably like a 10-minute game. We were the first table done. And I was like, wow, oh my God.
Oh, that's rough.
I forged the key, but barely.
To be that guy or girl, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
No, phenomenal player.
That's awesome.
Brad, I do want you to know that despite the fact that we haven't found your sea turtle friend, we did find our Buckingham the aquarium whale. So there are some aquatic names out there that maybe will fill that void.
The aquarium whale. I'm down.
Aquarium whale. It's big aquarium.
Well, Brad, I just wanted to thank you for coming on for this interview and talking a little bit about what the design looked like. And so it's been really cool just hearing kind of that background story. Is there anything else you wanted to let our viewers and listeners know before we let you go? Anything special or just word you want to get out there?
As always, I want to thank the community just for their support. The game wouldn't be nearly as wonderful without each and every one of you. And I can't wait to show you guys what's coming next.
Yeah, if you looked in our chat room, it's all questions about what about the second set? Tell me about the second set. So I think we're all very, very excited to see what is in store for the future of this game. And it's been fun.
What's the card I'm thinking of? Mars card, Blipip? Yes. Is it Blipip?
If he reaps, the next creature comes in ready.
Well, it's more as flavor text.
Oh,
all right.
I will. Are we going to look that up? Hang on a second here.
That'd be a great way to end this. Blipip. Look it up.
Yeah, look it up.
It's so good.
Boom.
Cool. Well, seriously, I really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us tonight. And it's been fun just hearing some of these stories. And hopefully we can maybe when that second set drops, we can bring you back on and we can talk about what it means for the game at that time.
I would love to.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks for hanging out, Brad.
Yep.
Have a wonderful night.
You too.